Hi there, I'm Jamie Whincup and welcome to Be Street Smart Online. Be Street Smart is all about road and driver safety, and today we start by taking a look at how modern cars are built to help you stay safe on the roads. Later on in the program, we'll be talking to two people who have had their lives really impacted by road crashes. But first, getting your licence is an exciting but nerve-wracking time for any teenager's life. To talk about some important safety information, please welcome John Wall from Transport for New South Wales. Hi John, can you tell us a little bit about Transport for New South Wales and how it plays a role in road safety?
Thanks, Jamie. I work for the Centre for Road Safety within Transport for New South Wales, and our aim is pretty simple. It's to reduce the number of deaths and injuries on our roads. We do that through the use of what we call a safe systems approach. So the safe systems approach revolves around safer people on our roads, safer roads, safer vehicles, and safer speeds. And by combining all of those areas, we come up with a holistic way of reducing those deaths and injuries that still occur on our roads today.
Are there more crashes in rural areas or metropolitan areas here in Australia?
Within Australia, there's more crashes in the rural areas, and for young drivers, they're about 3 times more likely to die or be seriously injured in a crash if it occurs on a rural road. So it's a really big issue for young drivers especially.
Yeah, wow. Why is that? What makes rural roads more dangerous than metropolitan areas?
There's a host of reasons. I guess some of the key ones are higher travel speeds. So a lot of those roads are rated at 100 kilometres an hour. But it's also about the infrastructure. It's about not having those crash barriers and those sorts of things that we see on the busier roads and in the major metropolitan areas. It's also about those big objects like trees, wildlife, and other sorts of road conditions that can really make it hazardous for driving, not just for young drivers, but all drivers.
A parent will often buy an older car for their child. They're assuming they'll put a few dings in it here and there. Is this a good idea?
It's not a good idea, but sadly we see this happen all the time. I often talk to parents about buying cars for their young drivers, and they'll say, well, we'll start them off with a cheap car first off. But cheap certainly doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. But you can get a safe and cheap good car. Let's have a look at some footage from our crash lab to give you an indication of that. Now there are 2 cars here. Both cars sell for around about $10,000. The red one is a 2-star rated vehicle. The silver car is a 5-star rated vehicle, and look at the difference that it makes.
Massive difference, yeah.
It's really unlikely that the driver in that red car would have survived that particular crash. We can see that the cabin has started to crash, the doors popped open, even the mannequin, our safety dummy there, has started to actually come out of the vehicle. It's a really unsafe situation, and if I'd gone to a crash like that, I would expect to find that that person had died or was very seriously injured.
Yeah. Big impact, but the 2009 Cruise has certainly held up much better.
Yeah, the 5-star car has held up a lot better. Let's have a look at the video now from the Cruiser's point of view. Okay, so we see here the big difference straight away. We're not getting that vehicle pushing into the cabin where the driver is. So their legs aren't being crushed as that red car came through. The front crumple zone's working exactly as it should. It's actually crushing and absorbing some of that injury. The car is pretty well intact in terms of the cabin, that safety cell that the driver sits in. And this just isn't about Crash Lab. Believe it or not, 18 months ago, I actually went to a crash. I work as a volunteer with the State Emergency Service as a rescue officer with them. I went to a crash involving exactly that same model of car, the silver Cruise that we just saw. A young fellow hit a tree well over the 60 kilometre an hour speed limit in that area. In fact, the engine of the car went for 20 metres outside that vehicle.
Wow.
That fellow survived.
Yeah.
If he'd been in a 2-star car, there is no way that he would have survived. So it's not just about what we do in the lab. This stuff transfers to the real road as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone talks about seatbelts, and everyone knows that seatbelts make a difference, but how much of a difference do seatbelts really make?
Look, they make a huge difference, and I think the best way of seeing that difference is, again, looking at one of our Crash Lab videos. So have a look at this one. So in this vehicle, we've removed the doors, and the camera is focused on these passengers that don't have seatbelts on at the moment.
Wow.
The first thing we see is that front seat passenger's head strike the windscreen, actually go through the windscreen. Imagine what that does to your brain. The second thing we see is the rear seat passenger effectively becomes a human missile. They come flying forward, they strike the back of the seat, which is going to injure them, but also the person in front as well. And in the final stages of a crash, that rear seat passenger's head actually strikes the head of the person in front. Really bad news, not just for the rear seat passenger, but for that front seat passenger that was hit by them as well.
Can we see the same crash with seatbelts on?
Yeah, we'll swap it around now. Exactly the same crash, but this time we're looking at the occupants that have got their seatbelts on. So we see the driver is held in the seat, they don't strike the windscreen. We can actually see the passenger that was unrestrained strike the windscreen in the background. The rear seat passenger, again, held nice and tightly in their seat, move forward a little bit. Look, I've got no doubt that we could have gone to a crash similar to that, and those people probably would have walked away with very few injuries, but it's very likely that the unrestrained passengers both would have died in that crash.
Yeah, massively critical.
Putting a seatbelt on, though, whilst we see it as being simple, there is a few important things that we've got to know about it. First of all, you've got to put your seatbelt on, make sure it comes across the shoulder. Occasionally we see people out there where they pull their arm out, they have the seatbelt running under, they're worried about, say, getting their good gear all crushed up, you know, if they're going out for a night on the town or something like that. The other thing that's really important is that it's got to be nice and low across your pelvis and down low and pulled up nice and tight. If it's loose, the same sorts of things happen. You can get some horrific injuries if you're not wearing your seatbelt properly. So make sure that when you're in a vehicle that you're doing that. And you guys would do that in the racing car all the time, I would imagine.
Yeah, nice and tight. Let's talk about speed. What's the difference between a car doing 60 kilometres an hour versus 100 kilometres an hour when it comes to a crash?
Well, I guess the mathematicians would say 40 kilometres an hour, but it's a much bigger difference to that in terms of your survivability. Let's have another look at a Crash Lab video that demonstrates this vividly. So this vehicle now is hitting our Crash Lab wall at 60 kilometres an hour. And you can see the front of the vehicle's crushed. We want that to happen, that's really important. But importantly, the cabin has remained intact so that the driver's restrained. If I came onto that particular scene, I could actually walk in, open that door, and that driver in this case would be probably quite okay. Let's add 40 kilometres an hour now to the crash scene.
Almost double.
And do it at 100 kilometres an hour. Exactly the same vehicle.
Oh, that's a big hit.
Massive, isn't it?
Massive hit.
The crumple zone worked, but it wasn't enough to stop the cabin starting to crash. The airbag worked, but it wasn't enough to stop that driver hitting the windscreen. As the vehicle comes to rest, you can see the door there has started to jut out. It's probably jammed. If we went to a crash scene like that, we open the door, it's likely that we would need rescue services to actually access that particular patient. That's more time that they've got to wait till they get the right medical help. It's a real issue. It's very unlikely that person would have survived an impact of 100 kilometres an hour.
So tell us what else Crash Lab does.
Look, Crash Lab does really important work. Not only do we look at used car safety ratings and those sorts of things, but we also crash new vehicles that are onto the market here in Australia and give them a 5-star rating as part of the, or a star rating I should say, as part of the ANCAP program. That's a really important thing. Do you know we've tested some new cars at Crash Lab that one model is tested as a 5-star car. They've updated the model. When we've crashed it, it's actually gone backwards and only got a 4 or a 3-star. So it's really important that we continue to crash test our new cars as well. The lab also does important work in the area of child restraints and testing them. We even test motorcycle helmets as well.
Some really interesting stuff there. Appreciate you joining us, John.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks very much. Well, hopefully this has helped us all understand a little better about why driving carefully on the road is so important. Join us in our next episode where we meet two people who have suffered life-changing brain injuries as a result of being involved in a road crash. Before we go, I'd like to thank Woolworths Petrol for supporting us and for being our presenting partner. Thanks for joining us today for this episode of Be Street Smart Online, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.